Bulgaria's Golden Visa program offers you permanent residency from day one, citizenship eligibility in just 5 years, plus full Schengen access, and a lot of investors are now looking at it as the replacement for Portugal's Golden Visa. A lot has changed in Portugal recently. The parliament just voted for the second time to double the citizenship timeline from 5 years to 10. And processing backlogs mean that many new applicants still wait for over 2 years just to get their first residency card. In fact, the Golden Visa that every other EU country copied is fast becoming one of the slowest and most uncertain routes on the continent. So the real question here is whether Bulgaria can actually deliver on its promise. I spent an hour talking with Mohamed Bennis from Arton Capital, who's been in this space for over 20 years, going through every alternative still open to investors. I'll show you where Bulgaria wins and where it doesn't, and also explain the 4 specific things that might disqualify you. So first off, let's take a quick look at what went wrong with Portugal. Well, 3 things happened here. In October 2023, the real estate route was closed down. That was how most applicants got in, and it's now gone. A few alternative routes remain: donation at €250,000, scientific research at €500,000, and job creation. But these are narrower and less widely used. For most investors now, qualifying investment funds at €500,000 are the cleanest route to the Portugal Golden Visa. Then in April 2026, Portugal's parliament voted for a second time in 6 months to extend the citizenship timeline from 5 years to 10. At the time of making this video, that vote is awaiting the president's signature. It still isn't law yet, but the direction is very clear, and anyone who's planning around 5 years really needs to assume that that window has closed. And then there's IMA, the immigration agency, which is so backlogged that first residency cards are taking over 2 years to issue in some cases. Your citizenship clock doesn't start counting until that card is in your hand, so every month of backlog is a month added to your total timeline. And none of this is a temporary blip. In fact, it's a structural shift. And it's why countries like Bulgaria are suddenly making their way into the conversation. So Bulgaria joined Schengen in January 2025 and adopted the euro a year later. Its fund-based residency by investment program launched in late 2023, which makes it the newest active EU route. And before we compare anything, one thing has to be made clear. Both the Portugal Golden Visa and the Bulgaria program are residency by investment programs. They're designed mainly for people who want to establish a foothold in Europe while continuing to live somewhere else. If you actually want to live in Portugal, then the D7 visa or the digital nomad visa will do the same job for a fraction of the price. And the same logic goes for Bulgaria. If you want to actually move there and live there full time, a standard residency route probably makes more sense for you than committing over €500,000 to a fund. And one more thing before running the numbers. Keep in mind that for both programs, you ought to budget an extra 10 to 15% on the total investment on top of the headline figure for things like legal costs, government fees, due diligence, document legalization, and biometrics. And in the case of Portugal specifically, because residency is temporary rather than permanent, you'll need to renew your card at least twice before you reach the point where you can apply for permanent residency or possibly citizenship, depending on the timeline. And each renewal runs into several €1,000s in government fees alone, a fact that rarely appears in the promotional content. So in terms of headline prices, the two are pretty close. Portugal is a minimum investment of €500,000 into qualifying funds, whereas Bulgaria is €512,000 into ETFs, with more flexibility than Portugal in what those funds can hold, including the possibility for real estate exposure. A €12,000 gap might sound like Portugal's win until you add in the renewal fees over a timeline that's potentially going to be stretching past a decade. That really closes the gap and then some. But where these programs genuinely differ is the fund choice. Bulgaria currently has about 3 qualifying funds. Arton's recommendation is primarily government bond weighted, so it's fairly stable, but it's still a real investment that can lose value. Portugal has the advantage of a much wider eligible fund market, which gives investors more control over the risk profile and sector exposure. So on price, more or less call it a draw. On fund flexibility, Portugal wins, and keep that in mind because it does matter for the final verdict. So that's the sticker price, but the real difference between these programs shows up the moment you're approved. When you apply for the Golden Visa in Portugal, it grants you temporary residency. You need to renew that every 2 years, you pay fees every time, and you only convert to permanent residency after maintaining your status for at least 5 years. On the other hand, Bulgaria grants the investors permanent residency from day one after they're approved. And if you take away one thing from this video, it should be that PR from day one is what makes the Bulgarian timeline real. Everything downstream flows from that. And the biggest thing downstream is how quickly you get the chance to apply for citizenship. Now, Bulgaria's regular citizenship timeline is 10 years. But in this case, it's 5 years from approval because permanent residency starts on day one after you're approved. The clock begins immediately. Portugal's timeline is officially 5 years from the date you're approved for temporary residency, but you need to factor in that parliamentary vote to extend it to 10 for citizenship, and the IMA backlog that's pushing first cards out past 2 years. And then the real number for new applicants aiming for citizenship is closer to 10 or 12 years. And one honest caveat on Bulgaria here. Nobody yet has actually reached citizenship under the current program yet, because it only launched in late 2023. So we're looking at around 2028 or 29 for the first round of naturalizations. So the 5-year promise is structurally sound, but not yet proven in practice. And there's one condition on Bulgarian citizenship that really needs to be on the table before you spend another minute thinking about this program. Bulgaria expects you to renounce your existing citizenship, giving you a 3-year window to do so after naturalization. If you genuinely cannot renounce, because some nationalities make renunciation legally impossible or practically blocked, there is a grey area provision that may accommodate you. And this is where getting professional legal advice really matters. And Arton Capital has deep experience with exactly this question. If you simply don't want to give up your US or UK passport or whatever passport you have, Bulgaria is probably not the right program for you. And I want to say that plainly because it's the single most underdisclosed thing in the promotional material and in the discussion. And having more options is important. So generally, giving up an existing citizenship is not a good move to make. So that's the timeline on paper. But whether or not it's realistic depends on processing. And this is where Bulgaria leaves Portugal behind completely. Next up, processing speed. Now, Portugal's IMA backlog is pushing the issuance of first residency cards beyond 2 years in some cases. And this delays everything, including the citizenship clock. In contrast, Bulgaria is running at 7 to 8 months from start to having PR card in hand. Pre-approval takes 8 to 10 weeks. The D visa is issued in around 30 working days and the PR application in around 45. And according to Mohamed, the program has largely held to that timeline so far. So for investors watching Portugal's timeline stretch out in real time, this is the most attractive thing about Bulgaria, and it's really the only category where Bulgaria wins without qualification. Speed is one thing, but the other question is how much of your life you actually have to rearrange around the program once you're in it. Let's look at physical presence requirements. In Portugal, a golden visa applicant has to spend an average of 7 days per year. Manageable, but you do have to keep track of days through methods like keeping hotel receipts or maintaining a travel log. In contrast, Bulgaria requires nothing. No minimum stay, no logs, no keeping track of a bunch of receipts. But one practical note here, if your end goal in Bulgaria is citizenship, then maintaining an address there from the moment you get PR is a very important concern. Costs around €200 a month, realistically, to do this, and it's a sensible precaution even if you're never really there. Now, before looking at the remaining categories, I want to talk about 4 important things that apply to both programs and almost never appear in the promotional materials. First off, tax residency and your investment are 2 separate questions. Holding Bulgarian PR or citizenship does not make you a Bulgarian tax resident automatically. Tax residency is typically triggered by spending at least 183 days in a year or more in Bulgaria, or by Bulgaria becoming your center of vital interests. If you're still living in the US or UK or other country and just holding the residency card, then you're not suddenly going to be paying Bulgarian tax on your worldwide income. Secondly, if you're a US citizen, then none of this changes your US tax obligations. The US taxes its citizens on their worldwide income wherever they live, and no residency program anywhere reduces that. Third, fund returns in Bulgaria are classed as Bulgarian sourced income, which may create a filing obligation for you in Bulgaria, even if you're a non-resident. Keep in mind that none of this is tax advice, and I'm not a tax advisor, so you should always take professional local tax advice before you invest, not after. The fourth factor is healthcare. Sometimes these programs are marketed on healthcare access as being a factor, and both really overstate it. Public healthcare in Bulgaria is typically tied to physical residency and paying into the social security system. So if you never live there, public healthcare is just a theoretical entitlement if you were to move there, not a practical one. So you should always budget for private health insurance or make sure you enroll in the system in the country you're actually living in. Getting back to the comparison, starting with the category that most investors underestimate until they're 3 years in and suddenly need to pass an exam. In terms of language requirements, for permanent residency, Bulgaria does not require any language exam. Portugal does require A2 Portuguese. But for citizenship, both countries currently require a level of A2 in the national language. But the routes to get there differ slightly. So Portugal has the A2 CIPL exam, but it does also have course-based shortcuts available if you can find an eligible government program to study on. Then you don't have to take the CIPL exam. Bulgaria requires a government exam that's held twice a year, and there's no course-based alternative. It's 20 multiple-choice questions with a pass mark of 12 out of 20 and an oral interview. So if naturalization in Bulgaria or in Portugal is your end goal, be sure to factor that in. Particularly, learning Bulgarian to A2 is a real commitment, and it's not a box that you can necessarily tick just by sitting through a course. Language is a solo commitment, but most investors are not going through this alone, and this is where some of the promotional material diverges most sharply from the legal reality. Let's look at family next. Now, the investment in the Bulgaria Golden Visa covers your spouse and children under 18 at no additional investment. Family members apply after the main applicant receives their PR through family reunification, and each will get their own PR card. But it's really important to remember that dependent parents are not included. I've seen some sources saying otherwise, but these are wrong. So if including your parents matters, then Bulgaria is not the right route for you. And Bulgaria also doesn't recognize same-sex spouses for family reunification under this program. So if you're in a same-sex marriage and you want to include your partner, Bulgaria is definitely not the right fit for you. Greece, Malta, Portugal, and Italy are potentially better options. So the bigger question is whether the program will still exist in the form that you're relying on by the time you reach the point of being eligible for citizenship. Both Golden Visa programs are stable. The issues with Portugal are policy and operational, not existential at the moment. So Portugal's Golden Visa isn't going to go away. But what has changed at the moment is the citizenship timeline, once it gets signed into law, and the processing capacity for residency permits. But both of these do affect the applicant experience, but at the moment, neither threatens the program itself. In Bulgaria, there's no domestic political opposition at present, and the fund-based structure gives it EU cover. The old Bulgarian fast-track program, the bond and real estate version, was shut down in 2022 after pressure from the European Commission. And the current program was specifically restructured to avoid that fate, and so far it's been holding firm. But the broader EU trend is towards tightening up on these programs. Spain closed its entire Golden Visa program in 2025. Ireland did the same 2 years earlier. And so far, Bulgaria's low application volume is probably what keeps it under the political radar. But anyone planning to invest today should assume that the door won't stay open forever. And this is important for both. If either program changed after you'd already received PR, your residency status would almost certainly be protected. It's the citizenship pathway that's the more exposed question, which brings us quite nicely to the question that this whole video is built around. So, is the Bulgaria Golden Visa the replacement for Portugal that it's being sold as? Well, for many people watching this video, the answer is no. There's only one real category where Bulgaria wins over Portugal without qualification, and that is processing speed and timeline to eligibility for citizenship. Everything else is either a draw or a point in Portugal's favour. And let me be specific and reiterate the 4 reasons to be cautious, because these are things that disqualify a lot of the audience for this video. First up is fund choice. Bulgaria has only 3 qualifying funds, which is a meaningful limitation for an investment of this size. Portugal's much wider fund market lets you diversify and select a risk profile that's more specific, but Bulgaria doesn't. Next up is dual citizenship. The renunciation expectation in Bulgaria is going to be a deal breaker for most US and UK investors who typically want to keep their existing passport. Same-sex marriage, no recognition under the program in Bulgaria, and this is disqualifying for LGBTQ investors who want to include their spouse. And finally, investment threshold. At 512,000, Bulgaria's program is marginally more expensive than Portugal's in terms of the investment. It's a small difference, but given the 3 limitations above, it's harder to justify. So the case for Bulgaria comes down to one thing: speed to citizenship. If that's your primary driver and none of the 4 above apply to you, then it's still a legitimate option worth exploring seriously. And one thing I want to say directly, this analysis has been built around investors who are comparing Bulgaria to Portugal as routes to a second passport and accessing EU citizenship. But If you're coming from a passport country with limited global mobility, then Bulgaria's offer for instant permanent residency is in itself a significantly appealing outcome before you even think about citizenship. Bulgarian PR gives you the right to live in Bulgaria as long as you want, not freedom of movement across the EU. That requires citizenship. But as a European base with visa-free Schengen travel, it's a meaningful upgrade in your options that UK and US investors sometimes underestimate because they already have it. So who is the Bulgarian Golden Visa actually best for? Well, investors for whom time to passport is everything. People who want fast EU permanent residency and may or may not go after citizenship. People who are willing to renounce their existing citizenship or who genuinely cannot renounce, so they would fall into the grey area in Bulgaria. Single applicants or couples in opposite-sex marriages without any dependent parents, and investors who are comfortable with a limited fund selection and a bond-weighted risk profile. So if that's you, Bulgaria does deserve a serious look. So there you have it. With Portugal's citizenship rules being rewritten, Bulgaria is offering something that's become quite rare in Europe right now: EU permanent residency from day one, eligibility to apply for citizenship after 5 years, and a processing timeline that most other countries can't match. It's not for everyone, as we've just covered in this video, but if none of those disqualifiers apply to your situation, and if you're prioritizing fast PR or speed to citizenship, then this is a genuinely viable option. If you want to take the next step, Mohamed is offering a free eligibility call for digital emigre viewers. It's a no-commitment conversation to explore Bulgaria's Golden Visa in more detail and work out whether it fits your specific situation. Fill out our short intake form at apply.digitalemigre.com to get started, and you'll find that link in the description. And if you found this video useful, please click like and consider subscribing to Digital Emigre for more content on building a successful life and global options beyond your country of birth. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.